The universe, they say, is indifferent. A vast, cold engine of gas and gravity grinding stars into dust over eons. It doesn't care about empires or dreams or the fragile flicker of life clinging to a speck of rock. But indifference is a luxury. For the humans of Sol System, the universe had just become actively hostile. It began not with a bang, but with a sigh. A slow, impossible dimming. Earth's sun, the golden heart of humanity for 10,000 generations, began to fade. Not the gentle twilight of dusk, but a sickly, creeping pallor that leached the warmth from the oceans and the color from the skies. Crops withered in fields that had fed billions. Glaciers, long in retreat, began their inexorable march anew. Panic, cold and sharp, slithered through the veins of civilization. Scientists scrambled, their instruments screaming impossibilities. The sun's output was being siphoned, not by some natural phenomenon, but by something precise, surgical. Then they arrived. They called themselves the Zenthari Concordance. Their ships were not vessels of war, but cathedral-like constructs of iridescent crystal and humming energy fields. Gliding into the Sol System with the serene inevitability of a glacier, they broadcasted not threats, but proclamations. Calm, resonant voices speaking in flawless, synthesized standard, echoing through every comm channel, every public screen. Citizens of Sol, your star is unstable. Its imminent collapse poses a threat to the delicate equilibrium of this sector. The Concordance, stewards of cosmic harmony, has enacted Protocol Solus. The stellar energy will be safely redirected. Your world will be preserved in stasis. Preserved. The word tasted like ash. Stasis meant frozen. Frozen meant dead. Not immediately, perhaps, but inevitably. A slow, cold death, wrapped in the gilded cage of alien benevolence. They offered relocation, sterile habitats on distant lifeless rocks orbiting stable but utterly alien suns, places without wind, without rain, without the deep resonant hum of a living world, places without home. Humanity fractured. Some, the desperate and the pragmatic, boarded the Zenthari transports. They vanished into the crystalline bellies of the ships, their faces etched with resignation, clutching children wrapped in thermal blankets against the encroaching chill. Others raged. Fleets of battered, jury-rigged warships, the last remnants of Earth's fractured navies and corporate security forces, gathered like angry hornets around the Zenthari Leviathans. They fired. Lasers sputtered against shimmering shields. Kinetic rounds vaporized meters from the hulls. The Concordance ships didn't even flinch. They simply absorbed the energy, their crystalline facets glowing brighter for a moment before returning to their serene, indifferent hue. A demonstration of utter, crushing superiority. On the frozen plains of what was once Kansas, beneath a sky the color of a week-old bruise, Commander Thorne watched the last transport lift off from the skeletal remains of Chicago, his breath plumed white in the sub-zero air, frosting the scar that ran from his temple down to his jaw, a souvenir from the resource wars that had bled Earth dry long before the Zenthari came. He wasn't watching the ship. He was watching the faces pressed against the viewports. Hollow eyes, empty stares, the look of people who had already died inside. "Hope's a luxury we can't afford anymore, Commander," rasped Kalen, his second-in-command, materializing beside him like a wraith from the swirling snow. Kalen was lean, wiry, his face a roadmap of old burns and newer despair. He'd lost his entire family, in the first wave of the Great Dimming. Pneumonia in a world where heating grids failed faster than they could be patched. They took the sun, took the heat, took the future. What's left to fight for? Thorne didn't look at him. His gaze remained fixed on the dwindling speck of light ascending into the leaden sky. "They took our home," he said, his voice low, gravel scraping on stone. "But they didn't take us. Not yet." He finally turned, his eyes the color of storm clouds over a dead sea, locking onto Kalen's, and they made a mistake. Kale, a fatal one. Kalen frowned. What mistake? They assumed we'd just lie down, that we'd accept their cold charity, that we're like the other species they've preserved. The Sorn's lip curled in a humorless smile. They forgot what happens when you corner a human. When you take everything, and leave only the will to survive. They forgot we're Deathworlders. The term hung in the frigid air, heavy with implication. Humans hadn't just evolved on Earth. They'd been forged in its crucible, ice ages, supervolcanoes, asteroid impacts, plagues that scoured continents. They were the ultimate survivors, the universe's most stubborn cockroaches, capable of thriving in environments that would kill lesser species in minutes. The Zenthari, with their serene order and crystalline perfection, had never encountered anything like it. They saw fragility. They saw weakness. They saw prey. High above the dying Earth, aboard the Zenthari command vessel Harmony's Resonance, Overseer Valen observed the human activity through a panoramic viewport that seemed woven from solidified light. Below, the blue marble was fading, its vibrant swirls of cloud and ocean muted, its continents dusted with unnatural snow. Data streams, elegant glyphs of shifting silver, flowed across the air before him, detailing energy extraction rates, atmospheric decay projections, and human compliance statistics. Compliance remains suboptimal, Overseer, intoned Sub-Officer Lyra, her voice a melodic chime devoid of inflection. Her form was slender, humanoid but elongated, skin like polished obsidian shot through with faint internal veins of soft blue light. Her large, multifaceted eyes, devoid of pupils, reflected the dying Earth. Resistance clusters persist, primarily in the former North American and Eurasian sectors. Their primitive weaponry poses no threat, but their persistence is statistically anomalous. Valen, taller, his crystalline carapace shimmering with deeper amethyst hues, didn't turn. His thoughts were a slow, deliberate current, like deep ocean tides. Anomaly is inefficient. It disrupts the pattern. Their biological imperative for warmth and light is understandable, yet their refusal to accept the inevitable stasis is illogical. Preservation is the highest good. Why cling to a dying ember? Perhaps, Lyra suggested, her internal lights pulsing slightly faster. They lack the Concordance's understanding of cosmic balance. Their history is one of conflict, consumption, self-destruction. They are chaotic. Chaos is entropy, Valen stated, the words resonating with finality. Entropy must be contained. Their relocation habitats are prepared. The final phase of Protocol Solus commences in 3 solar cycles. Once the primary stellar tap is fully engaged, the planet's core will destabilize. There will be no more time for sentiment. He finally turned his head, those multifaceted eyes fixing on Lyra. Ensure the remaining non-compliant clusters are neutralized. Gently. We preserve the species, Lyra, not their defiance. Gently, Lyra echoed, the word tasting strange on her non-existent tongue. She bowed her head, the blue light within her dimming slightly. It shall be done, Overseer. As she glided away, Vaden returned his gaze to Earth. A flicker of something, not concern, but perhaps a faint analytical curiosity, passed through his consciousness. The humans were behaving unpredictably. Like insects trapped in a jar, they weren't just dying quietly, they were scratching at the glass. It was inefficient, messy, but noteworthy. Deep within the geothermal vents beneath the frozen wastes of Iceland, humanity's last, desperate hope pulsed with a heat the Zenthari couldn't comprehend. Project Lazarus wasn't a weapon, not in the traditional sense. It was a gamble, a fusion of scavenged Zenthari energy tap fragments, reverse-engineered alien tech, and the raw, desperate ingenuity of human engineers who hadn't slept in weeks. At its heart was Dr. Elara Vance, her face gaunt, eyes burning with a feverish intensity that outshone the flickering emergency lights of the cavern. Her hands, stained with grease and something darker, danced over a console cobbled together from server racks and salvaged alien conduits. It's not enough, Eris, she hissed into the comm unit, her voice raw. The Thorne's face, grim and etched with exhaustion, filled a small screen. The energy feedback loop is unstable. One wrong pulse, and we don't just blow up the tap. We blow up half the planet, and ourselves with it. We don't have a choice, Elara. Thorne's voice was calm, but the strain was audible beneath the surface. Valen's giving us 3 days. 3 days until they pull the plug completely and leave us a frozen tomb. This is the only play. It's suicide. Kaelin's voice cut in, sharp with fear and anger. He stood behind Thorne in the command bunker, pacing like a caged animal. You're asking us to fly a bomb made of their tech, powered by their stolen sun, right into the heart of their biggest ship. It's madness. Madness is accepting extinction. The Thorne snapped, whirling on him. The storm in his eyes is terrifying. They think we're predictable. They think we'll break. We show them what happens when you push a human past breaking point. We show them we'd rather burn the whole damn universe down than live in their cold, perfect cage. Elara stared at the schematics on her screen. A complex web of energy flows converging on the massive Zenthari stellar tap orbiting close to the sun. The tap was the key. Disrupted, and the stolen energy might flood back, or it might trigger a catastrophic solar flare that would sterilize the inner system. It was a coin flip with the fate of Earth. But the alternative was certain. Slow death. Kaelin's right about one thing, Elara said softly, her fingers hovering over the final sequence. It is suicide. For whoever pilots the delivery vehicle. She looked up, meeting Thorne's gaze through the screen. I'll do it. Thorne's jaw tightened. No, that's my call. It has to be me, Elara insisted. A strange calm settling over her. I understand the tech, the feedback tolerances. If anyone can thread that needle, it's me. And? She paused, her voice dropping to a whisper. My daughter, she's on one of those relocation ships. Maybe if this works, if Earth lives, there's still a chance she comes home. A single tear traced a path through the grime on her cheek, freezing almost instantly in the cavern's chill. Thorne held her gaze for a long moment. The weight of command, the burden of sending someone he respected to almost certain death, pressed down on him. He saw the resolve in her eyes, the same desperate fire that burned in his own gut. He gave a single sharp nod. Godspeed, Elara. The launch was a silent scream in the frozen night. The delivery vehicle, a skeletal frame cobbled from a decommissioned asteroid tug and wrapped in scavenged Zenthari shielding, lifted off from a hidden geothermal vent, its engines muffled by the thick ice sheet above. Inside the cramped cockpit, Elara Vance strapped herself in, her breath fogging the visor of her patched pressure suit. On her console, the countdown to the Zenthari's final tap engagement glowed red. She thought of her daughter's laugh, the smell of real grass, the warmth of sunlight on her face. Things the Zenthari would never understand. Things worth dying for. High above, aboard the Harmony's resonance, Overseer Valen monitored the anomalous energy signature. A tiny, insignificant blip against the vast backdrop of the dying sun and the Concordance fleet. A final, futile gesture, he murmured to Sub-Overseer Lyra, who stood beside him. Predictable, inefficient. Dispatch a single patrol skiff. Neutralize it before it disrupts the primary tap sequence. Lyra inclined her head. As you command, Overseer. But as she turned to relay the order, a flicker of unease, alien and unwelcome, stirred within her crystalline core. The humans, they weren't behaving like data points. They were behaving like something else. The patrol skiff, a sleek dart of iridescent crystal, intercepted the human vessel just beyond the orbit of Mars. Its weapons hummed to life, bathing the skeletal tug in a field of disruptive energy designed to disable, not destroy. Standard procedure for non-compliant biologicals. Inside the tug, alarms shrieked. Elara gritted her teeth, wrestling with controls that fought her. The Zenthari field was scrambling her systems, her carefully balanced feedback loop threatening to collapse. She couldn't let it happen. Not yet. With a roar of defiance that echoed only in her own helmet, Elara slammed the throttle forward, overriding safety protocols. The tug, overloaded and unstable, lurched towards the skiff, not away. She wasn't trying to escape. She was going through. The Zenthari pilot, conditioned for predictable responses, hesitated for a critical half-second. Long enough. Elara triggered the primary charge. Not the main Lazarus device, but a smaller, focused plasma burst jury-rigged into the tug's nose. It wasn't meant to destroy the skiff, but to overload its delicate energy receptors. The explosion was blinding, silent in the vacuum, but violently bright. The skiff's crystalline hull flared white-hot, then cracked like dropped glass, venting atmosphere and light into the void. The human tug, critically damaged, spun wildly, trailing fire and debris, but still on a trajectory towards the massive stellar tap near the sun. On the Harmony's resonance, alarms blared. A sound rarely heard on a Zenthari vessel. Valen's multifaceted eyes widened almost imperceptibly. That was not neutralization, he stated, his voice losing its usual resonance, gaining a sharp edge of something else. That was sacrifice. Lyra stared at the tactical display, the tiny, dying human vessel hurtling towards the tap. The data streams flickered erratically. Overseer, the feedback signature. It's interacting with the tap's core matrix in an unprecedented way. Valen watched. A cold dread, utterly foreign to his ordered existence, beginning to coil in his core. The humans hadn't just attacked. They'd calculated, they'd used their own destruction as a weapon, and they were aiming it not just at the tap but at the very heart of the Concordance's operation. "Scramble all defensive arrays," Valen commanded, his voice cracking like ice. "Divert primary power to the tap's containment field. Now." But it was too late. The dying tug, piloted by a ghost with a mother's love and a species fury, slammed into the base of the colossal Zenthari stellar tap. For a single, suspended heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, the tap screamed. Not a sound, but a wave of pure, chaotic energy erupted from the impact point. It wasn't the controlled siphon of the Concordance. It was raw, unfiltered solar fury, amplified and twisted by Elara's unstable feedback loop, lashing out like a wounded star god's whip. The wave hit the nearest Zenthari ships first. Their serene crystalline hulls didn't just shatter. They vaporized, dissolving into clouds of incandescent plasma. The Harmony's resonance shields flared blindingly bright, then buckled under the onslaught, cracks spiderwebbing across its majestic form. Alarms became a continuous deafening shriek. On the bridge, Valen was thrown from his command dais. Lyra clung to a console, her internal lights flickering wildly, her mind reeling. This wasn't chaos. This was weaponized chaos. This was the Deathworlder spirit made manifest, not just surviving but turning the very forces meant to extinguish them into a weapon of terrifying, unpredictable retaliation. Below, on the frozen surface of Earth, Aris, Thorne, and Kalen watched the sky. The bruised twilight was suddenly violently illuminated, not by the weak sun but by the dying screams of Zenthari ships. Streaks of fire and light tore across the heavens, painting the snow in hues of crimson and gold. Kalen whispered, awe and terror warring in his voice. What did she do?" Thorne didn't answer. He just stared at the burning sky, a grim, terrible understanding dawning in his storm-gray eyes. Elara hadn't just bought them time. She'd shown them the way. She'd shown them that the Zenthari could bleed. And as the first wave of superheated plasma, deflected but not contained by the dying tap, began to wash over the upper atmosphere, causing the very air to glow with an eerie, radioactive aurora, Thorne knew the real war had just begun. The Zenthari hadn't just taken their sun, their home, their hope. They had awakened something far more dangerous. The sky bled fire for 3 days. Not the gentle, cleansing fire of a sunrise, but the angry, radioactive glare of a star scorned. The plasma wave from the shattered tap, though partially deflected by the Harmony's resonance-failing shields, had scoured the upper atmosphere, igniting auroras that painted the frozen world in sickly greens and violent purples. It also did something else, something the Zenthari hadn't anticipated, and humanity hadn't dared hope for. It warmed the planet. Not back to its former glory. Not yet. But the relentless, soul-crushing cold began to recede. Patches of snow melted, revealing the black, scarred earth beneath. Rivers, sluggish and choked with ice, began to flow again, carrying the ash of fallen Zenthari ships. It was a brutal radioactive thaw, but it was warmth, and warmth meant life could cling on. Hope, fragile and scorched, flickered back to life. In the hidden bunkers and geothermal caverns, a new kind of energy crackled. Not just electrical, but human. Lyra Vance's sacrifice wasn't just remembered. It was weaponized. Her name became a battle cry. Her final act, a blueprint. The Zenthari weren't invincible. Their order had cracks, their perfection had flaws, and humans desperate, ingenious, and utterly ruthless knew how to exploit flaws. Thorne stood on the observation deck of the newly christened Lazarus station, a repurposed deep space mining platform orbiting the still dim but now active sun. Below, Earth was a wounded beast, steaming and groaning as it thawed. Above, the remnants of the Zenthari fleet were regrouping, their crystalline forms scarred and dimmed, radiating a palpable aura of confusion. Anger, Thorne couldn't tell, but their serene confidence was gone, replaced by a wary, almost fearful vigilance. Scans show heavy activity around the primary Concordance ship, Kalen reported, his voice tighter, harder than before. The fire in the sky had burned away his despair, replacing it with a cold, focused rage. He'd volunteered for the first salvage mission to the debris field of the destroyed skiff. He'd seen the melted, twisted remains of Zenthari technology, and the chillingly organic-looking residue that might have been crew. It hadn't been pretty. It hadn't been clean. It had been real. They're reinforcing their perimeter, building something new near the TAP's wreckage. Good, Thorne said, his eyes fixed on the distant wounded Leviathan. Let them build. Let them reinforce. They're scared, Kale. Scared of what we did. Scared of what we might do next. He turned, his scar stark against his grim expression. We hit them where it hurts. Not their ships, their certainty. Aboard the Harmony's resonance, the air hummed with a dissonant frequency. The usual serene resonance was fractured, replaced by a low thrum of tension and doubt. Overseer Velen moved through the corridors, his amethyst carapace dull, the internal light within him flickering erratically. The damage reports were catastrophic. 3 patrol skiffs obliterated. Shield harmonics destabilized. Core matrix integrity compromised. And the worst part? The why. They used their own destruction as a catalyst, Velen stated, his voice devoid of its former resonance, sounding almost hollow. He stood before the shattered main viewport, looking out at the debris field where the human vessel had died. They calculated the precise point of failure. They embraced entropy to disrupt our order. It is illogical, suicidal. Sub-Overseer Lyra stood beside him, her obsidian form seeming smaller, her internal blue light dimmed to a faint pulse. She had reviewed the sensor logs 100 times. The human pilot hadn't tried to evade. She'd accelerated. It was not merely suicidal, Overseer, Lyra said, her chime-like voice strained. It was strategic. They understood the TAP's vulnerability better than we anticipated. They turned our own technology against us. A pause. They are not chaotic, Overseer. They are adaptive. Dangerously so. Vervallen turned his multifaceted eyes on her. Adaptive? Or merely desperate? Desperation breeds recklessness. Lyra, not strategy. Recklessness is inefficient. It leads only to mutual annihilation. But what if? Lyra ventured. The words feeling dangerous. Their desperation is their strategy. What if their entire history, their Deathworld existence, has forged a species that thrives in the chaos we seek to eliminate? What if they are not broken by pressure but sharpened by it? Velen was silent for a long moment. The concept was anathema to the Concordance's core tenets. Order, preservation, harmony. Chaos was the enemy. Yet, the evidence was undeniable. The humans hadn't broken. They'd fought back, and they'd drawn first blood. Their defiance must be extinguished, he finally declared. But the resonance was weaker, the conviction less absolute. Prepare the silencer. Deploy it at the source of their resistance. Let them see the true cost of disrupting the pattern. Lyra bowed. But as she turned away, a cold dread settled in her core. The silencer. A weapon of last resort, designed not to destroy but to unmake, to sever the connection between a species and its homeworld on a quantum level, rendering the planet instantly and permanently sterile, a dead rock devoid of even microbial life. It was the ultimate enforcement of stasis. It was monstrous, and Valen, shaken by the human defiance, was willing to use it. The Concordance's serene morality was cracking under the pressure of an enemy they couldn't comprehend. On Earth, the thaw brought not just warmth, but opportunity and danger. The forces, now calling themselves the Sole Resistance, were scavenging the Zenthari wreckage with a ferocity that bordered on the feral. Teams in patched pressure suits and jury-rigged exoskeletons combed the frozen plains and the radioactive seas, pulling out shards of crystalline hull, intact power cells, even fragments of the strange, organic-looking control interfaces. Dr. Elara Vance's notes, recovered from a hardened data core on the Lazarus station, became their Bible. In a cavern lit by the eerie glow of salvaged Zenthari power cells, Ren, a young engineer with eyes too old for her face and fingers stained with alien alloys, worked feverishly. She'd lost her parents in the initial dimming, survived on her own in the ruins of London for months before finding the resistance. She saw the Zenthari tech not as alien but as parts to be taken apart, understood, and Got it, she yelled, holding up a fist-sized crystalline node that pulsed with a soft blue light. This is a harmonic regulator from the skiff's shield generator. If we can modulate its frequency. She trailed off, her mind already racing through calculation. We could make a localized dampening field, something that punches through their shields for a few seconds, long enough for a kinetic strike. Kalen watched her, a flicker of something like pride in his hardened eyes. Kid's got fire, he muttered to Thorne, who stood observing. Reminds me of someone. He didn't say Elara's name. It still hurt too much. Thorne nodded. Fire is what we need, but fire needs direction. Ren, can you scale it? Make it ship-mounted? Ren's eyes lit up. Give me a week, Commander. And access to the big power cell from the primary tap fragment we hauled in yesterday. And maybe some of Dr. Vance's notes on energy feedback loops. Consider it done, Thor said. We're building a spear, Ren, and you're forging the tip. The work was brutal, dangerous. Radiation sickness was a constant threat. Zenthari patrols, more aggressive now, swept the skies, their weapons lashing out at any sign of activity. But the resistance grew bolder. They weren't just hiding anymore. They were hunting, using the very terrain the Zenthari deemed dead, the radioactive seas, the unstable ice sheets, the toxic atmosphere, as cover. They were the ghosts in the machine, the grit in the perfect gears of the Concordance. One night, under the pulsing auroras, Kalen led a raid on a Zenthari sensor outpost perched on the ruins of the Himalayas. It was supposed to be a quick in and out, grab the data core, vanish. But the Zenthari were waiting, not with overwhelming force but with a trap, energy nets, designed to immobilize, not kill. They wanted prisoners. They wanted to study. Kalen's team was pinned down on a crumbling glacier, the cold biting through their suits, the energy nets crackling inches away. Hope was fading fast. Then from the shadows of a collapsed monastery, figures emerged. Not resistance fighters, survivors, civilians, men, women, even children, armed with little more than scavenged pipes, makeshift flamethrowers cobbled from chemical tanks, and sheer, desperate fury. They charged the Zenthari positions with a guttural roar that echoed off the mountains, a sound of pure, unadulterated human rage. The Zenthari, conditioned for predictable military responses, were momentarily stunned. Their energy nets faltered. In that split second of confusion, Kalen and his team broke free, turning the tide. The civilians didn't win the fight. Many fell, but they created the opening. They bought the seconds needed. As Kalen dragged a wounded civilian, a woman with eyes like flint, back to the extraction point, he looked at the bodies left on the ice. Not soldiers, just people. People who refused to be erased. The cold rage in his heart softened, just a fraction, replaced by a profound, aching respect. This wasn't just his war anymore. It was theirs. The silencer deployment was swift and silent. A sleek, obsidian-black Zenthari vessel, devoid of the usual crystalline beauty, detached from the harmony's resonance and descended towards Earth, its target, the geothermal vents of Iceland. the heart of the resistance, the birthplace of Project Lazarus. Overseer Valen watched from the bridge, his expression unreadable. "This will end their defiance," he stated, though the words felt less like a command and more like a plea to the uncaring universe. "It will restore order." Sub-Overseer Lyra stood beside him, her internal lights pulsing with a frantic, anxious rhythm. She monitored the silencer's descent, the quantum destabilization field powering up. She saw the sensor returns from the surface. Not just military signatures but dense clusters of biological life, civilians, families. The very essence of the world the Concordance claimed to preserve. The hypocrisy of it, the sheer, cold waste of it, struck her with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't preservation. This was extermination disguised as mercy. The Concordance's serene morality had curdled into something dark and rotten. "Overseer," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "The biological signatures, they are concentrated. Non-combatants. The pattern must be maintained, Lyra." Valen cut in, his voice hardening. "Sentiment is entropy. Activate the field." Lyra's hand hovered over the activation rune. Her entire existence had been defined by obedience, by the harmony of the Concordance. But Elara Vance's sacrifice, the civilians charging on the Himalayas, the sheer, stubborn life radiating from the dying world below, it resonated within her in a way the cold logic of the pattern never had. It was chaotic. It was inefficient. It was beautiful. With a surge of will that felt like tearing her own core apart, Lyra didn't activate the field. Instead, she slammed her hand onto a different console. An emergency recall beacon, coded to the silencer's unique signature. The obsidian vessel, mere minutes from unleashing its sterilizing wave, shuddered. Its descent halted. Confused signals flashed across Valen's console. "Lyra, what have you done?" Valen roared, the resonance in his voice shattering into pure dissonant fury. Lyra met his multifaceted gaze, her own internal light blazing with a defiant blue fire. "I preserved life, Overseer," she stated, her voice clear and strong for the first time, as the Concordance was meant to do. "Not destroy it." Valen stared at her, disbelief warring with cold rage, betrayal, from within. The cracks in his ordered world were becoming chasms. "You are compromised," he hissed. "You have succumbed to their chaos." "Perhaps," Lyra said, turning to face the viewport, watching the silencer being reeled back towards the fleet. "Or perhaps I finally understand what true harmony requires. It cannot be imposed. It must be chosen." The revelation struck Thorne like a physical blow. He stood on the Lazarus station, staring at the sensor data Ren had just decrypted from a captured Zenthari convoy. The data wasn't just troop movements or weapon specs. It was a confession. A record of the silencer deployment order, and Lyra's sabotage. They were going to sterilize the planet, Thorne whispered, the words ash in his mouth. "Not just defeat us. Erase us. Wipe the slate clean." He looked at Kalen, who stood beside him, face grim. But one of them stopped. Kalen frowned. Why would a Zenthari do that? Thorne's mind raced, connecting the dots. The hesitation in the initial patrols, the way they'd seemed almost curious. "Because they're not all monsters, Kale," he said slowly. "Some of them, they saw what we are, what we're willing to do, and maybe they saw something worth saving, even in the chaos." The devastating revelation wasn't just the Zenthari's genocidal intent, it was the dawning understanding that the enemy wasn't monolithic, that within their perfect order there were cracks. There were individuals, and one of them had just thrown her lot in with the desperate, chaotic humans. The war had just become infinitely more complicated, and infinitely more dangerous. Because Valen, humiliated and betrayed, would not show mercy again. He would come for them with everything he had, and he would come for Lyra. The Concordance fleet didn't just regroup, it transformed. The serene, cathedral-like ships were gone, replaced by angular, predatory vessels of obsidian and jagged crystal, bristling with weapons that hummed with a dissonant, angry energy. The Harmony's resonance itself was scarred, its amethyst hull patched with darker, angrier-looking plates. its once gentle resonance replaced by a low, threatening thrum that vibrated in the bones of anyone nearby. Overseer Valen had shed the last vestiges of benevolent steward. He was a conqueror now, and his target was clear: total annihilation. The final assault began not with a declaration but with silence. A crushing, absolute silence, as the Zenthari jammed every human frequency, plunging the resistance into sensory darkness. Then the sky tore open. Zenthari warships descended like avenging angels of a twisted god, their weapons lancing down not with disabling fields but with searing beams of pure entropy, energy designed to unravel matter at the molecular level. Cities that had begun to stir back to life under the radioactive auroras were reduced to swirling clouds of gray ash in seconds. The geothermal vents of Iceland, the heart of the resistance, were primary targets. The ground shook as entropy beams carved canyons into the living rock. Aboard the Lazarus station, chaos reigned. Alarms blared, but the comms were dead. Screens flickered with static or showed only the horrifying spectacle of Earth being unmade. Thorne stood on the bridge, his face a mask of grim determination, but his knuckles were white on the railing. They were blind, deaf, and the enemy was everywhere. Ren, status on the dampening field. Thorne barked, his voice cutting through the panic. Ren, her face smudged with grease and sweat, fingers flying over a console wired directly into the station's core, didn't look up. Field's charged, Commander, but it's untested at this scale, and we've got maybe 3 shots before the power cell fries. 3 shots are all we need, Thorne said, his eyes scanning the tactical display, a mess of red blips swarming the planet. Kalen, get the Maelstrom prepped. We're taking the fight to them. The Maelstrom was their flagship now, a heavily modified ore freighter, armored with scavenged Zenthari hull plating, bristling with jury-rigged railguns, and mounted on its spine, Ren's dampening field projector. It was ugly, brutal, and utterly human. As the Maelstrom launched from the Lazarus station, punching through the jamming field with brute force EM pulses, Thorne saw the true scale of the devastation. Earth was a canvas of fire and ash. But he also saw something else. Tiny points of light flaring and dying across the surface. Resistance cells. Civilians. Fighting back with whatever they had. Old artillery, suicide drones, even coordinated waves of EMP bursts from hidden generators. They were dying, but they weren't surrendering. They were buying time. For him. Aboard the scarred Harmony's resonance, Overseer Valen watched the human resistance flare and die on his displays. It was inefficient, messy, but necessary. Purification required fire. His multifaceted eyes narrowed as a new, larger signature emerged from the orbital station, the Maelstrom. The source of the defiance, he murmured, a cold satisfaction in his voice. Eliminate it. Utterly. He didn't see the small, unmarked Zenthari courier vessel that detached from the fleet's rear, its transponder dark, its course set not for Earth but for a hidden rendezvous point in the asteroid belt. Sub-Overseer Lyra was gone. Her betrayal had been discovered. Her only hope was the humans she'd saved, and the data crystal hidden in her carapace, containing the Harmony's resonance's shield frequency harmonics and the core command protocols. The battle was a maelstrom indeed. The maelstrom weaved through the Zenthari fleet like a wounded shark, its railguns spitting hypervelocity slugs that sparked harmlessly against shields until Ren activated the dampening field. The first shot was a gamble, aiming for a heavy cruiser flanking the Harmony's resonance. The field projector hummed, a visible distortion rippling outwards. For 3 precious seconds, the cruiser's shields flickered and died. The Maelstrom's railguns roared. Slugs the size of small cars punched through the crystalline hull, detonating in the ship's core. The cruiser didn't explode, it unraveled, its structure collapsing into glittering dust that scattered on the solar wind. A ragged cheer went up on the Maelstrom's bridge. Hope, sharp, and dangerous. Second shot. Target the resonance forward emitters. The Thorne ordered, but the Zenthari had learned. As the dampening field activated, the Harmony's resonance shields didn't just hold. They flared, absorbing the disruptive energy and feeding it back as a concussive wave that slammed into the maelstrom, buckling its hull and knocking out half its systems. Shields at 20%. Kalen yelled from the weapon station, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. Dampening fields overheating. Ren, can you give us one more? Ren was frantically rerouting power, her hands a blur. Maybe. But the feedback, it'll fry the main bus. We'll be dead in the water. Do it, Thorne commanded. Aim for the bridge. The maelstrom lurched, listing badly as Ren poured every ounce of power into the projector. The distortion field lanced out, weaker this time, but focused. It struck the Harmony's resonance bridge section. The shields there stuttered. Now, Kiel, Thorne roared. Kalen, teeth bared in a feral grin, slammed the firing stud for the maelstrom's last massive kinetic penetrator. A single slug forged from the core of a neutron star fragment, scavenged from a long-dead human colony. It shot out, silent and deadly. It struck the resonance's bridge, just as the shields flickered back to life. Not a clean penetration, but the impact was colossal. The crystalline structure shattered, not into dust, but into massive, jagged shards. Atmosphere and light erupted from the wound. The mighty ship listed violently, its thrumming resonance descending into a discordant shriek of agony. On the bridge of the maelstrom, cheers turned to gasps as their own systems died. The dampening field projector exploded in a shower of sparks, throwing Ren back. The ship went dark, tumbling helplessly towards the burning earth. Silence. Then a weak, flickering comms channel opened. Not Zenthari. Human, cracked, desperate. Maelstrom. This is Lyra. Do you read? Thorne grabbed the mic, his heart hammering. Lyra? Where are you? Asteroid belt rendezvous. As planned, her voice strained but clear came through. I have the data. The resonance's core is exposed. Its command protocols are vulnerable. But Vatharan. He's not on the bridge. He's in the primary tap control nexus. Deep inside the ship. He's going to overload the tap's core. Trigger a supernova-level flare. He'd rather destroy the sun and earth than let you win. Thorne's blood ran cold. Valen's final gambit. Mutual annihilation. Can you stop him? Thorne asked, his voice tight. I can try, Lyra said. But I need a distraction. Something big. Something that draws his focus and his remaining defenses. Thorne looked at the dying maelstrom, at Kalen struggling to restart systems, at Ren stirring on the deck. He looked down at the burning earth, at the tiny points of light still flickering in the ash. He thought of Elara, of the civilians on the Himalayas, of Lyra, risking everything. He knew what he had to do. Kalen, Thorne said, his voice suddenly calm, get Ren to an escape pod. Now. Kalen's eyes widened in horror. Eris, no. The ship's dead. You can't. It's not dead yet. Thorne interrupted, a grim smile touching his lips. It's got one last run in it. Set the autopilot. Course, Harmony's resonance primary tap nexus. Maximum thrust. Ramming speed. Thorne, you crazy bastard. Kalen yelled, but there was a terrible understanding in his eyes. He knew. He'd known since Kansas. This was the Deathworlder way. When cornered, you don't just fight. You become the weapon. Kalen helped Ren into a pod, his movements swift, efficient, his face a mask of grief and resolve. He clapped Thorne on the shoulder, a silent farewell that spoke volumes. Then he was gone, the pod jetting away. Alone on the bridge of the crippled maelstrom, Thorne engaged the last of the emergency power. The engine sputtered, then roared to life, pushing the massive broken ship on a collision course with the heart of the Zenthari command vessel. He didn't look at the view screen showing Earth. He looked at the scar on his jaw, a reminder of all he'd lost and all he was fighting for. Hope's not a luxury, Kale, he whispered into the empty comms, knowing Kalen couldn't hear. It's the weapon. Inside the shattered Harmony's resonance, chaos reigned. Overseer Valen, his carapace cracked, internal light flickering erratically, stumbled through the ruined corridors towards the primary tap control nexus. Alarms wailed, atmosphere hissed from breaches. The data crystal Lyra had stolen. It contained the final command sequence. He had to reach it. He had to end it. He burst into the Nexus, a vast chamber dominated by the swirling, unstable energy of the damaged stellar tap core. And there, standing before the main control interface, was Lyra. "You cannot do this, Vaylon," she said, her voice resonant despite her own injuries. "This is not preservation. This is madness. Madness is allowing chaos to triumph." The Allen snarled, his voice distorted. "The pattern must be restored, even if it means burning this sector clean." He lunged for the control interface. Lyra moved to block him, but she was weakened. Vaylon struck her, a blow that sent her crashing against a console, her internal light dimming dangerously. As Vaylon reached for the final activation rune, a new alarm blared, proximity alert, massive, unstoppable. He turned, just in time to see the silhouette of the maelstrom filling the massive viewport of the Nexus chamber. It wasn't firing, it wasn't maneuvering, it was coming straight for them. A final, desperate charge. "No!" Vaylon screamed, a sound of pure, dissonant fury. He abandoned the interface, scrambling for a personal escape pod. But it was too late. The maelstrom, piloted by a ghost with a commander's resolve and a species fury, slammed into the Harmony's resonance tap nexus with the force of a small moon. The impact wasn't just physical. It was the collision of two ideologies: order versus chaos, preservation versus survival. The sheer kinetic energy, combined with the unstable tap core, triggered a chain reaction Vaylon had only dreamed of. But in reverse, instead of a supernova flare directed at Earth, the energy imploded. The tap core, the Harmony's resonance, the maelstrom, everything within 1,000 kilometers was consumed in a silent, blinding sphere of collapsing energy, a miniature black hole born of desperation and defiance, that lasted only a microsecond before winking out, leaving only expanding clouds of vaporized metal and crystal. Silence. Then slowly the bruised sky of Earth began to change. The radioactive auroras faded. The weak siphoned sunlight began to strengthen. The Zenthari stellar tap was gone. The stolen energy was flooding back. Not all at once, not perfectly, but back. On the surface, survivors crawled from rubble, shielding their eyes from the sudden, unfamiliar brightness. It wasn't the golden sun of old. Not yet. But it was warm. It was theirs. In a hidden bunker, Kalen watched the readings on a salvaged console. The sun's output was stabilizing. Earth's core was still active. The Zenthari fleet, leaderless and shattered, was retreating into the void, their perfect order broken beyond repair. He looked at the small view screen, showing the empty space where the maelstrom and the Harmony's resonance had been. No debris. Just nothing. He bowed his head, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on his cheek. Not just for Thorne, for Elara, for all of them. Then a new signal flickered on the comms. Weak, but clear. Zenthari origin. Kalen tensed, hand going to his sidearm. But the voice that came through was familiar. "Lyra, the Concordance fleet is withdrawing," she said, her voice weary but steady. "Velen is gone. The pattern is broken." Pause. "I am transmitting the full schematics of the stellar tap technology and the Concordance's network frequencies. Use them wisely, Kellen of Sol. The universe is larger than we knew, and not all within it desires your extinction." The transmission ended. Kalen stared at the screen, then at the strengthening light filtering through the bunker's viewport. He thought of the woman on the Himalayas, of Ren already tinkering with the new data, of the children who would grow up under a real sun. They had taken their son, their home, their hope. But in the crucible of that loss, they had forged something the Zenthari could never comprehend. Not just survival, not just victory. They had forged a future. Kalen walked out of the bunker, into the weak, warming sunlight. He didn't look back at the ruins. He looked up at the sky, no longer bleeding, but healing. And for the first time in years, he smiled. The Deathworlders had endured, and the universe would never forget what desperate humans become.